Dr. Dingra is currently the head of the Department of Horticulture Sciences and professor of genomics and biotechnology here at A&M. Completed his BS in botany from Hindu College, also received a PhD from University of Delhi, and also worked at Rutgers and received also degrees at Rutgers, supported by fellowships at University Grants Commission and Rockefeller Foundation. After his postdoctorate training at Rutgers, University of Central Florida, and University of Florida, he joined Washington State University in 2006 as a tenure-track assistant professor and served as professor and interim chair there before moving to A&M in September 1st of 2011. So that was 21 and 21. He has not celebrated his first year anniversary yet, and I made reference to that your first year anniversary is coming up, and I know that you've had a wonderful time being here. We have thoroughly enjoyed having you. His research program focuses on understanding biological processes of economic and environmental relevance in horticultural plants. The knowledge gained is translated to crop improvement through various approaches. He has trained over 17 graduate students and several postdoc students and over 100 undergraduate students, and in 2017 he was awarded the Council of Undergraduate Research National Biology Mentor Award. He has published more than 79 high-impact peer-reviewed journal articles, and he serves on the editorial board of 5 international reputed plant science journals. And before I close, I've also had the opportunity, and he's going to join us at NCHU, hopefully in Taiwan in November. And so we're getting him to advance his international portfolio, which is something that's very important to all of us that work at the Borlaug Institute. Continue our international footprint around the world. We're so happy to have you join us for this outstanding presentation and here at Texas A&M University. So Dr. Dingra, it's all yours.
Howdy.
Howdy.
Howdy. Well, thank you so much, Ambassador Bose, for this honor. I know it's a seminar for most of you, presentation. We've done so many, and I've kind of worked my way up here. But I just wanted to let the significance of this sink in a little bit for a person like me who grew up in New Delhi in the times when food was very short. So, you know, in our AGLS building, you've probably seen this these photographs, and I don't know if you've stopped and paused and read it. It says, some credit him with saving more human lives than any other person in the history. Now I can point to my generation, people who grew up in late 60s, early 70s, who benefited directly. So I am one of the millions of people or billions of people who have benefited from the research of Dr. Norman Borlaug. And I don't know, I cannot understate the importance, the personal importance of being here today at this forum. So thank you for joining me in this. This is sort of a high for me in my profession, professional, personal journey, and I thank you for joining me in that, and as well as I want to thank my colleagues who've joined online as well, so I really appreciate that. I was not always aware, as many of the people are not today, about Dr. Borlaug's work when I was growing up, because when you grow up in abundance, you don't know where you come from sometimes. I would like to thank and acknowledge my colleague, Dr. Virginia Aurora Herrera. She's a scientist in CC in Merida. I was teaching a workshop one time in Mexico, and she asked me the question, do you know what is the relationship between Mexico and India? I said, maybe they're on the same latitude. She says, no, it's Dr. Borlaug, because he developed the disease-resistant wheat there, later developing the dwarf wheat, and that's what really fed the part of the world. And she gifted me this book, and I could not keep the book down, because in that I learned what a scientist, what extent a scientist sometimes needs to go. He set the bar very high for us. He set the example for us. He pitched the governments of India and Pakistan against each other so that they could grow the dwarf wheat to feed the population, the people, the public. So I think the significance is very clear. Some of you already know this. I was not aware, and I learned this about a few years ago. So you can understand that standing here in Borlaug Institute today, giving this presentation means a lot. So thank you for being on this journey with me. The challenge that Dr. Borlaug was addressing in the 70s hasn't changed. It's just evolved into the similar question. Now we have an even bigger problem. And of course, you heard this ad nauseum. We need to, feed more people, 10 billion people by 2050. That's not too far away. That's our children, that's our grandchildren, that's us, some of us in the room. It's really happening right now. So how do we, if we keep doing what we've been doing since the early 1900s, we have to always keep evolving. So today's journey, what I'll share with you is sort of my personal journey growing up in a country which benefited directly from a scientist's work who was in this university. And it really gives me goosebumps to shake hands with people, walk the same hallowed hallways as Dr. Borlaug. Of course, I never planned to come to Texas A&M, and I'm finding myself here. So I guess there is some fate playing its hand in this. And also, just as Rockefeller Foundation funded the work of Dwarfy, I find it sort of, in a way, almost, I don't know, fate again. I got Rockefeller Foundation pre-doctoral fellowship to come to the US in the first place. So I guess the work started by Dr. Borlaug or different foundations creates more and more people like me, and I just feel very fortunate to be here in front of you. We can talk about this. So I'm going to share my experiences at WSU, Washington State University, what I did with entrepreneurship and innovation. It's just one example. So it's not a science talk today. I'm sure you're not here for that, but I just wanted to share the journey that I took and what we can do today. And as I've taken on a leadership role, how some of those elements are coming to bear, some of the programs we are initiating here as well. So I just told you, I just started in September at Texas A&M. For 15 years, I was at WSU. Another fateful part, a lot of you don't know that the genetic material for dwarfing wheat was sent by Dr. Vogel, who is based at WSU. I worked in the Orville Vogel Plant Biosciences building. Of course, these are all connections I'm trying to make. Maybe these are connections in my head, some importance, but they matter to me, so I just want to share with you. So you could call it a coincidence, all of it, but here we are. So it's also, I just wanted to show off my personal mission. As I told you, I grew up in India in the 1970s. Actually, I was born in 70. We were not making enough food yet, or that's the first year we started making some of this, rice, wheat, pulses. And I stood in ration lines myself, getting substandard quality wheat, rice, oil, palmoline. I remember I used to love it. It was donated by US at the time. So I grew up in those lines, always wondering, why are we getting substandard food? And somehow I switched to agriculture. So another thing from the 70s in India is if your parents are doctors, even before you're born, you're supposed to be a doctor. I'm a nickname growing up was a doctor, which is like a medical doctor. But standing in these lines, I always used to wonder, why can't we make more abundant, nutritious food? So that's kind of helped me defy the rules of professional inheritance, not genetic, and really move towards agriculture. And my mother, who's a big influence on me, really taught me some examples because she was utilizing her knowledge day in and day out to treat patients. And some of these values that have become ingrained from her, so I just want to acknowledge her role in getting me here as well, of course, in more than one way. So these are some of the values that we obviously have at our university system as well. So I'm really grateful to be here. Now, when I moved to the US, I was not aware of what land grant mission is. So in '99, I came to Rutgers University. I heard the term first time. But I realized land grant mission really provides us an opportunity to connect with all communities, to serve all communities. That was the mission that spoke the most to me. It's like any kind of literature or any kind of book you can pick up. It's your interpretation of it, I guess sometimes. Land grant mission to me spoke of service. And that's where, even though I was trained in fundamental sciences of plant molecular biology, it made more sense to me to, while doing that work, also connect with my communities. These are some of the images of reaching out to different sectors of the industry, horticultural industry, while I was at WSU. I would like to acknowledge my colleague, Dr. Matthew Whiting, who, when I got hired, he was my colleague in the department. He said, well, you can do your genomics and biotechnology in your lab all the time, but if you left your ivory tower and visited with the farmers, your life might change, and he couldn't be farther from the truth. It's been a transformative experience. It's helped me give a family outside of work, outside of my home country. I've been trained to do a lot of things by farmers directly. So it's been an amazing journey, and that's where land grant universities really provided. And now last 15 years I was being prepared to come here, right? So this is a bigger platform, a bigger family. So the mission that I was able to articulate for my research is to sustainably produce nutritious food in abundance. So when I was growing up, the emphasis was calories. Let's make more wheat, rice. So my PhD is in rice. But as we have moved to the next phase, the idea is that's not enough. We need more nutrition as well, or we need calories plus. Keeping that in mind, I focus on my research in the areas of plastid biology. Plastids is a generic name for chloroplast. Everything that's green around you in plants is where all the carbon capture happens. So that determines yield as well as nutrition. And then I also look at post-harvest quality, which is when the fruit is harvested or stored, you actually start losing its nutrient content, nutrition content. You may have heard that potatoes, for example, or other foods are very rich in vitamin this and vitamin that, but as soon as it goes in the cold chain, those start degrading. So how do we maintain that? So those have been my areas of research, plus I've been working on plant pathogen interactions as well as plant-soil interactions. So I'm your typical master of one. I'm a jack of all trades, who's better than master of one. I hope you got the play of words there. It's not a tough crowd. I think lunchtime people are, hungry, so I'm glad you're with me on my journey. And we use a lot of different approaches in conducting this type of research. And I don't do fundamental research, I don't do applied research, I do research. So I just want to also say, growing up with my parents who were focusing all their knowledge in treating patients, that didn't distinguish between, are you curing geriatric problem or are you curing fever? It's just whatever it is, you've solved that problem without classifying the knowledge base in the back. So I'm kind of agnostic of this division that exists in our society now. I've always wondered why that exists, and I have some ideas to share about. Of course, I'm here because of my team, so I want to acknowledge all my folks in the program who contributed, worked together, and came together in time since 2006. So a lot of these people, and if I said their names and accomplishments, I can finish the lecture here. But I just want to acknowledge them because of them. I'm here. I'll just overview. We are trying to understand the metabolic processes in chloroplasts of fruit, nuts, horticultural crops. That's where nutritional compounds are made, vitamins, aromatic compounds, and that's also very important for climate resilience today. So we've been working on this for the last few years. We've also developed some technologies to regulate ripening because of understanding of biological processes. Of course, there's an issue of wastage of food. So we've developed technologies. We've identified some novel regulation of ripening in pears, but it's applicable beyond pears. We also have another set of technologies around that. And these projects started from what the farmers were talking about. But I've just shown you briefly, that those practical questions have become fundamental knowledge, and now what we are discovering from there, we are now taking it to market by developing new products. So it's a full cycle of things. And of course, this has economic value. So isn't that what land-grant universities for? To be the engines of economic impact. Of course, my research has been funded by so many groups. I'm very grateful. Over here, I have a question mark there, because universities like Stanford or Yale or Harvard have a very long history of creating companies, and somehow the understanding is that's their domain, not ours, which is we are the public universities. And I just wanted to ask that question because I never wanted to be an entrepreneur, by the way. I'm an accidental entrepreneur. I just wanted to make sure that I didn't start my career in academics thinking that one day I'll start companies. There are people like that. I wanted to address this question. I wanted to bring up one of my mentors at WSU, Professor Joe Hardy. He's a professor emeritus now, Regents Professor. He's the founder of Athira Pharmaceuticals, who has developed drugs for neurodegenerative diseases. And his company is the first one in WSU to go public. He just raised over $200 million through a public offering. When I met him the first time, he said it is a moral responsibility, obligation, that we give the public a return on their investment. Now, we can't give them money back. We can definitely make sure that our research reaches them, it improves their lives, and in the process, of course, he's created so many jobs himself. So this kind of captures the essence of, like, when he said that to me, I was like, I can't say it any better. So I can't say it any better. I put it on words for him. And the point is, why do we need entrepreneurship? What has happened over many years now is that the state and federal funding for our public universities has dropped. And there are some, you all know this, some of the administrators who've seen these cycles of funding, you know this better than me. Mark that this is a study from 2014. That was 8 years ago, and we know there have been major cuts since then as well. So how do we continue business? How do we create innovation? So the the example is that lots of universities are now trying to jump into creating technologies that can be commercialized, and somehow our idea is that we will make millions of dollars from that technology commercialization. It doesn't work that. Not everybody produces a Google or a Honeycrisp apple, right? But there are approaches to do this. And public universities have been hit the hardest. While there's an incentive for us to make sure that our technologies get to market, money obviously comes into picture, but also as we create more impact, create more jobs through this process, it really allows us then to get public support. Because this reduction also perhaps a reflect of erosion of public trust in institutions of higher learning. We see it all around. There's public mistrust in science already, or in what universities are doing. This is sort of a reflection of all of that. This graph has gone down further. I don't have those numbers because they haven't published. The question, I just wanted to share with you how I got involved and what that has done, not only for me, but for my group, but for while I was at WSU, what we were able to do. So I'll just talk a little bit about that. So my area was understanding the needs of the tree fruit industry. I got to go prune trees, plant trees, pick fruit. It was just an amazing experience, and that's why while I've joined here, always on the road, trying to meet with industry, learning more about the industry over here, because while I do fundamental research sometimes, when they're telling me the problems, I'm thinking in my mind, what could be the molecular basis? Can I find the genetic or the biochemical basis of this so we can find a chemical to regulate? All that process keeps on going in the background. So while I was doing that, learning from them what their problems are, and the spin-off, the technologies that I just told you started happening in these orchards and these nurseries where I learned all. One of the issues that horticultural industry across the country, across the globe have, that they are not able to get fruiter-type clonal material. Unlike row crops, which are grown from fruiter-type seeds. So if you have a variety IR44, all thousands of millions of seeds are IR44, the rice variety, I think. But in case of apple rootstocks or apple cultivars, you can't tell them apart just by looking at a twig. So that was one problem they brought to me, and there have been so many mix-ups that probably this part of the world never hears about, is because you don't grow apples. But it's a major issue with every crop. And then also there are big diseases that are coming in. So we utilized our biotech platform as well as our genomics platform, combined the two. We didn't do any big science in this case. We basically translated what everybody does in their lab to some extent to the industry. We actually developed this methodology where we utilize the in vitro methodology, greenhouse production to produce trees so that farmers can save 5 to 7 years on their ROI. Very simple. In fact, one of my professors, one of my senior colleagues came and told me, "You're not doing science, that's not science." So yeah, that's not science. We're solving somebody's problem. It's okay. It's not science for you, but it's okay for me. I think this is where I wanted to point out at a land-grant university, what we do in our jobs is open to interpretation as well as what our job descriptions are. So we have so much flexibility and opportunity. This was the first spin-out from the College of Agriculture. I was an assistant professor at the time. They said, "You're crazy, you're gonna fail," because an assistant professor should not start companies, and don't include your students and lab mates. You're giving away money. It's like, I'm not doing it it's what the farmers, I have the technology. So it was an experiment. It was a fun, this was my version of the garage band. These people have become entrepreneurs on their own. They're doing great things as they've graduated and moved on. We learned a lot over the last, I started in 2011. This is already 11th year. I've learned a lot. My first company also already failed. I've already started a second one. They say once you start one, one of my colleagues who has 11 startups from UC Davis, he's a National Academy member. He's on his 10th or 11th company. He always advised me, you started one, you'll go to the next. And before I knew, I was already on my second. Anyway, so if this entrepreneurship is so good, why do we do it? And I'll share some things that when I started, one of my colleagues told me this, that I don't believe doing this. My area is to do fundamental research. I don't care about it. Stakeholder asked me, isn't it illegal? Well, if it were, universities won't be doing it. This was a very nice one. When one of my former chairs told me, our university president at the time was really encouraging commercialization and innovation. And when I was asked why I started a company, I told him, hey, the president wants it too. Not only the farmers need it, but the president. His answer was, well, I don't care about president. I don't give any credit for that. But there was also an equally good voice in this, was that, I get to do what I do supported by public funds. I must pay back. I would say one thing, that at a university there is so much diversity. Not everybody has to do it. It's not for everyone, because frankly, there is no night and day. If you really are passionate about what you do, then as they say, you don't work a day in your life. It's not for everyone. I don't mean to say, don't try it at home, okay? if you don't like it. In our country, in the US, there have been some legislative changes since the 80s that now mandate that universities do that. So here's an answer if it's illegal to do this or not. The Bayh-Dole Act really allowed universities to protect their intellectual property. In fact, we are required to demonstrate economic impact. And that's why whenever you go to, for example, our agri extension has a huge economic impact, right? That's another way to demonstrate economic impact. In Washington, the laws were modified in 2005 to allow public entities to do this sort of commercialization. I haven't had time to assess what's happening in Texas, but I would imagine this is a business-friendly state, so hopefully there is I need to understand how this works here. But I think why we don't do much of that, there's a saying, you get what you reward. This is our reward system, so there is a big chasm. We've left the stakeholders out of it. So this is kind of a reality at most institutions. That's where we've all moved. I understand, again, because of that budget cuts, universities are looking for IDC, indirect cost, overhead. I mean, this is a challenge as department heads we face that. It's like, where do we get the operating? So I understand playing in this role as well, that these are challenges that we're facing. But the reality is why we're not doing a lot of commercialization. I've kind of become a student of understanding why this happens. I don't have all the solutions, so I'm sharing with you, maybe our community can come up with. Also, one thing that I started wondering, being in the university system in the US, is this pseudo-caste system. Oh, you're an applied scientist. Somehow you're lesser than the fundamental scientist. I think it's the IDC part, right? How much money? Money talks, right? And I kind of have gone into this and tried to understand why this happens. And my neighbor, my colleague, Professor Nick Loveridge, I forgot his name there, Professor Nick Loveridge, because I know him very well, right? So I used to go meet with him. He's my neighbor and was a neighbor at WSU. Next to my house, and I would go sit down with him and ask him these questions. He's a professor of criminal justice, and he's been around quite a lot. He introduced me to a book, Pasteur's Quadrant. I don't know if anybody here has read that. No. So this is an interesting. It was an interesting read. It's been written by Donald Stokes. He was the dean and professor of politics and public affairs at Princeton. And it was interesting because being a scientist, why am I reading a book on policy? But the question was very painful when I saw the differences between how extension colleagues are treated, how fundamental scientists are treated. Why this division when we are all in the same mission? The credit for this division could be given to Vannevar Bush. He was the science advisor to President Wilson. After World War II, he was asked to form National Science Foundation, and he just picked up a random model of research, this linear model of research, where the idea was federal money comes into basic, and then everything translates to social benefits, and how it happens, when it happens, somebody will take care of it. It was kind of left like that. You can see that's reflected in our funding agencies. I'm very glad those funding agencies exist, don't get me wrong. I'm very grateful for their support. What I'm trying to address is why does this exist? And in a way, this book also gives a theory that why there's a difference between a fundamental scientist and an applied scientist. Somehow the basic researchers is considered a little bit greater than the person who does outward work. We can kind of go back to our philosophers in the back because they were the thinkers, right? They made the workers do all their jobs. It's kind of, it was an interesting read. I don't know if it's true, but it was an interesting read to see the Aristotles of the world and Socrates of the world. The thinkers were considered exalted, of course, at the time, and the people on the ground, the slaves who were doing all the work, were considered lowly. Donald Stokes makes that argument that somehow subconsciously, unconsciously, we've inherited that thinking. It's time to innovate. We need to level the playing field, because I think today we should be thankful to the folks who are out there in the public, helping us get the message, get the impact out there. And this is a plug for Extension, of course, shameless one, because I represent all three branches, right, as a department. So I just wanted to introduce you to Pasteur's Quadrant, where this particular graph is a nice way to show that on the y-axis is the quest for fundamental understanding, high to low, and then consideration of use is on the x-axis. So there are different scientists who exemplify the two extremes in the middle. So you've got Niels Bohr, who was obsessed by splitting the atom, fundamental research, and people say, well, what's the impact? Today, 70% of US GDP can be tracked back to that experiment. Now you had the other gentleman, Edison, on the other side, who was not worried about how things work. He did 10,000 experiments, famously, to develop the electric bulb. Of course, you can say everything is lighted because, so again, a huge impact on economics. programs. But then we had pastors who did youth-driven research, was need-driven research, which we can all do here as well. Is our communities or our stakeholders have need? Can we do fundamental and applied research to answer their problems, either ourselves or in collaboration? So that's where a land-grant university is uniquely poised to bring people together, expertise together to really solve problems and demonstrate societal impact. NIH has followed that model clearly, where they are curing cancer, which is a need-driven research. You can call it applied, but then they're also discovering the molecular mechanism of how cells interact with each other, how they have programmed cell death, which is fundamental research. So NIH has a great example. Similarly, software industry has utilized that model. So I think we, especially in agriculture, we have to have need-driven research. And might I remind you again, Dr. Borlaug did need-driven research. Would you classify his research as fundamental or applied? I would dare to answer that because he fed a lot of people. You could call it applied, but he utilized the tools of genetics to make sure that we could get the dwarf and disease-resistant cultivars. So how do we really foster this inclusion where we bring people of different ideologies together and innovation? Policy is the first. If you would have asked me 10 years ago what's policy, I wouldn't know anything about it, but thanks to my mentor and colleague, Dr. Loveridge, that I've learned a little bit about that. Also this perception about us versus them, we need to drop that a little bit. These are obviously my little recommendations for myself, and as a leader in the department, that's what I always promote, that if we start doing this, we can't get anywhere. We need to percolate these ideas in classrooms as well. And then finally, partnerships are very important. So these are some 4 Ps, as they say, to really promote inclusion as well. And some of the observations of creating this entrepreneurial environment and creating innovation, how it just impacted my group quite a bit was we learned to incorporate something as simple as project management. I know at Borlaug everybody does that, but we scientists sometimes fly by the seat of our pants. I remember doing my PhD. My professor would ask me every week, so how was the work? Like, I did this and I did that. So just brought a lot of structure. Industry does that quite well. I learned to do fiscal training quite a bit. We got to manage our resources better because the public money that's coming to us, we are responsible for it. We want to make sure we use it judiciously and frugally. It transformed my graduate student and undergraduate student because they were exposed to real needs of the industry. It inspired them, motivated them. And I'm proud to say, except for a couple of people from my lab, most of them are going back and serving the public in one or other category. And of course, the stakeholder engagement. It's a strange term, but it's created these long-term relationships. Although I've left Washington, I'm still in contact with so many of my former family, if I would say. They have questions, they reach out, I have questions, I reach out for advice. It builds a network. And then, of course, these are expanded opportunities. We're not just playing in our own backyard. We can make regional, local, national impact. So I've also spent a lot of time in understanding why entrepreneurship is not very common in academics. So in 2018, after I got promoted to full professor, I was granted a 1-year-long sabbatical leave, a professional leave. And I decided to sort of ask a question, which was actually centered on my undergraduate students. So I had undergraduate students in the classroom who were always worried about grade. Are we on the same page? Everybody's worried about grades, right? Well, in our universities, that's the case, in most universities. But why is it that students at, say, Stanford want to drop out and go start a company? If you have read about Theranos recently, that's an exception to the rule, but just want to say that the culture is very different. And I just wanted to understand what's going on. So during this time, I did a sabbatical leave. I also got to read this wonderful book by my colleague, Steve Gawazzi at the Ohio State University. He trained me to say that properly. It's a very good read. If you haven't read it, it really centers us around service. It centers us around what we need to do to keep the relevance of land-grant universities. And on the other side, my first startup was sinking. I had passed on the responsibility to an outside management, and somewhere it got lost its mission, because my mission was to serve the farmers. Their mission was to flip it around, quickly make profit. Perfectly normal goals, opposing goals to some extent. So it was a time of quite of thinking and introspection, and all that travel that I got to do was cool. So what I did was I actually visited several universities, spent some time meeting with my colleagues who had started companies. I met with some of the technology transfer officers. I met with some students. So this was my sabbatical. It was a pretty creative sabbatical. You can kind of see how a plant molecular biologist is going out and trying to do these things. But this has opened door knowledge and understanding that I wouldn't have had otherwise. So again, that's another beauty of being at a land-grant university. So all your students who don't want to go to academia, who always think, let's get better money in the industry, these are some of the perks of being you can learn and enhance your knowledge and come back and maybe profess about it. So the question was, why do students at most universities worry about their grades while at, places like Stanford, they want to do something impactful? And the outcomes, I'll just summarize for you. Of course, there are always external and internal factors. The idea of the difference that I found that some organizations thought about impact rather than the balance sheet. Of course, it pays if you big endowments. There's a lot of money at Stanford and Yale. We struggle. That's why we have to worry about the balance sheet. Going back to that funding cut, 26% that I showed you, this is an impact of that. Then they also had elements that fostered entrepreneurship and innovation in other universities. Looking at time. And one thing I don't have here, which summarizes it all, and older people know this well, is the difference between short-term thinking and long-term. As we grow older, we start thinking longer term. And the younger generation people, I'm right in the middle, so I'm at 50. I'll just say I'm in the middle. So this difference that you develop for long-term thinking is, I think that it's also true for institutions. Institutions that think long-term can really make an impact. So when I met with folks at Stanford, they told me that 40 years ago, they had already started thinking about making sure that their technologies get to the market. Where they started 40 years ago, we are just starting to get on that bandwagon in the last 10, 15. By the way, Stanford is a private university, but they realized that they were getting all their money from NIH, which is public money at the time. They wanted to make an impact. It's great, we can take some moonshots now learning from them. So let me just walk you through a few things. I kind of created this little, as a scientist, you want to classify, put things in bins and that's what helps me understand the world. And here's a little graph where all the universities I went to, I found that the role of university leadership to initiate these things is very important. So when I was at Stanford, I asked the question, how does your president promote entrepreneurship? And the person across the table looked at me as if I'd asked a very stupid question. What do you mean the president? They don't have time for this. Well, it's a very revealing answer because they were already mature. They're already mature. They don't need university leadership promoting these kind of things. But universities that are at the beginning of this process, early stages of this process, they need grassroots level, both bottom-up and top-down approaches to really promote this type of an environment. And eventually, it's the culture, long-term cultural change. So at Stanford, for example, on campus, everybody's talking about how do we start a company? How do I take this technology further? What can I do with this? I remember sitting at a local coffee shop for 2 hours meeting with some of my colleagues. It was interesting. Around me, there were people meeting with potential entrepreneurs. That's the ecosystem. So can we get there? Maybe someday. But all I'm saying is that these were the observations that I was able to glean from these. So I found some of the elements, the grassroots programs that EFA means Entrepreneurial Faculty Ambassadors Program. This was a program I led at WSU. Then long-term commitment from institutional leadership. Such emphasis has to outlast the tenures of administrators. It has to be beyond that. So after a few years, if I'm not the department head, and if there's an entrepreneurial club in the department, it should continue. It should not be tied to an individual. It should be a cultural change. Common makerspace where people can come together. And that starts from if they're already collaborating between different disciplines, makerspaces start happening. And then a central entrepreneurship program, which we already have here. So that's pretty cool. Some of the challenges that we are facing as institutions of public higher learning, funding decline is a reality for all of us. I'm not going to read through all of these, but I just want to say that I would recommend reading this book. All of us should read this, especially in leadership roles, because it really helps us understand the challenges we face and what solutions we can come up with to overcome some of these issues. People say we can't be everything to everyone. Totally get it, but that's a model that companies have. We are a public service land-grant university. Somehow the public expects us to serve where they are. So how do we balance the expectation versus what we can do? So I told you my company was failing. 9 out of 10 companies fail. So I'll just wrap up in the next few slides. I told you short-term versus long-term thinking was the basis of it. I felt that I was very ill prepared to communicate and collaborate with what's happening in the outside world and the internal culture. I just told you, some people were like, you shouldn't be doing this. So there should be not all of us to walk one direction. We should have diversity of approaches and ideas. The other part is different perspectives. Academics think that business is dark side of the moon. No laughter, come on. No Pink Floyd fans here? All right. And of course, same thing as business thinks, we are on the dark side of the moon. You know. Well, let's bring everybody to light. There is a way to really combine our ideologies and principles. Tough crowd, I know it's lunchtime, but let's just keep going with that. So we can really combine a lot of these things together. That's where we need to evolve to, I feel. Again, this is my sort of personal perspective on this. This is not a prescription by any ways, because everybody will have their own journey. And that's the other beauty of being at land grant. You can carve your path as you like. So as a scientist, you solve some problems and then you ask more questions. So I just wanted to leave some questions. I've kind of wondered about how do you create an entrepreneurial culture at a university? Leadership has to play a big role. So in our department, that's why I'm trying to lead a few initiatives. We are also starting an incubator program. We started a community development program, what we call as spirited learning. If you want to learn more about that, please drop me an email. It's around wine tasting. I will leave it at that. Why is there a contentious relationship between faculty and technology transfer offices? I found that to be true at most places. Short-term versus long-term thinking. The idea was, can we bring people who are already trained in the industry to work in technology transfer offices so we can speak the same language? Should the students and faculty also be trained to understand industry culture? We all are in the business of learning. We can all be trained, no matter our age. And can business schools offer certificate courses to train faculty and staff and students to be fiscally efficient, because we need that. And then I always wondered that all our psychologists and organizational behavior scientists are giving these big talks, they're famous, they're writing books for the industry, yet we don't do that training internally. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for that. Before I keep going, I just want to talk about real world impact. Just wanted to give you a little example. These are just some of the major technologies that came out of Stanford over the years. And here is the land grant universities, where we have three major pillars that allow us to connect with all communities, national, international. Dr. Borlaug solved the world's problem in what we all can do together if we kind of drop all these other silos in our mind. And just as a reminder, industry engagement tools are already available. Extension has a major role to play. It is already playing that. I don't need to write the numbers. It's $1.3 billion impact just from agronetics. That's a huge economic impact. But our colleagues in Extension also know the problems. As we partner with them. I'm very excited to be here because I work with a lot of my Extension colleagues. I have new ideas every day. It's exciting. I know when I won't be a department head in a few years. I know where to start working and do things. And then I also heard that when donors give to university, the money goes in a sort of towards a goal, right? It's always like it's supporting education. But it was interesting for me when I was starting my first company. Some of the investors came to me and said that we really like this because we know where the money is going. It's solving my real-term problem. And if your company ever sells, it will make me money. So there are multiple incentives. And how do we create translational programs by partnering with the industry? I just have these benefits that come to everybody in industry. We can take care of their emerging challenges because we need to be there. Students, it transforms their education. A lot of our students, undergrads that I got to work with are working with industry right now. Faculty and staff, we can keep getting challenging ideas, which keeps us competitive for grants. And then, of course, at a university, we're fulfilling the land grant. So with that, I just wanted to thank you. Thank all my current and former lab members. Some of them are online today. Thank you. Collaborators. I was very fortunate to be the first cohort of the Provost Leadership Academy at WSU, which kind of gave me the foundation to move in this direction. The EFA program, my mentors and friends at WSU, and the horticulture industry in Washington, and now in Texas. I'm building my family here. And then I'm so grateful to be at Texas A&M. Thank you so much for your time. And I will leave us with this final thought because we need to make sure we keep feeding the world.
I think we have about 10 minutes for questions, and so please, I think this was not only interesting but also very thought-provoking, and so please ask Mathilde.
Thank you, first of all. I really enjoyed the way you intertwine topics that we don't usually talk about together. You mentioned a few times the importance of leadership in kind of setting a culture, and you also talked about the importance of giving stakeholders a say in what is happening. So I would like to know your thoughts of the stakeholders' influence when leadership tries to create such a culture.
So you're asking the influence of stakeholders when leadership tries to create a culture.
Yes.
If the culture that is being, if the leadership is trying to create a culture that's aligned with the,
That is not aligned.
that is not aligned with them. That's a great question. My question back is, as a land-grant university, of course we can't keep everybody happy. We know that. I'll just take one example, what I had to do. So it might address your question partially because I was just a lowly associate professor at the time. No, it was not a leadership change, but the same commodity across the West Coast. I was working with 3 different growing regions. They all had different priorities. And when I spoke to the folks in Northwest, they wanted something else. Folks in California had different needs. It took a lot of effort traveling, meeting with them, understanding what their common needs are, where they could all agree to. Now that takes time, effort, a lot of investment in terms of, just being there. There's no magic answer to your question. I think what we can do is in our hands is to make an effort to understand what are the common things that could please a larger group, and then kind of culture that. Because at the end of the day, what is our mission is also to serve the larger groups. But that's why also we have colleagues who work on pecans, colleagues who work on fruits. So that's where I'm just speaking at my level right now, not at an institutional level. I think trying to understand what is common could be a way to go forward. I can't answer from a president's level or chancellor's level or even a country's level leadership, because that's another part. But that's kind of where our university level, I think at our department head level, that's what we always try to do, right, Sandy? I'm just making sure and Brian, yes. I have some support on that. That's a very tricky question, very wicked question, I would say, wicked problem to solve.
Womi.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for this presentation. It resonates with me because I'm an entrepreneur and I'm getting my doctorate degree. So I've been trying to look at how to balance practicing and my question is to your graduate students and your undergraduates. Did you see a focus on you training them more to be innovative? Like I see here, we are big on publication and research, and you're talking about cultural change. How do you see leadership leaning into encouraging more of innovation versus more of research and publication? And what was your own strategy with your students that kind of encouraged them to, grow and blossom into what they eventually became?
So that's a great question again. Wow. I hope I heard. Do I need to repeat the question?
No.
It's okay. So the answer to that is the fact of the matter, it's not one or the other, right? We have to publish because that's sort of our currency, if you will. The idea of innovation, and all of us are different individuals. You have to realize when we become graduates, program mentors, we're all individual and we bring individuality to the thing. So I'm not saying somebody's bad, wrong, or right, correct. That's not this discussion is about. I believe that's where you need to choose a program where you see a balance of things being done a certain way, because there are multiple models of success in academia. There's not one. So regarding if you are interested in both innovation and making sure publication, I think a program, I would say a program like mine would be great. But if there are groups that are doing fundamental research, only publishing, that's another group because they are generating knowledge. The only thing is that they are creating the fundamental base to really help others, people like me perhaps, to utilize that knowledge to create innovation. So I think we are a community and not individuals in that sense. And I did mention earlier that we need everyone. That's where the whole idea of diversity is not just where we come from, but what we think as well and what we do in that sense. So I think we need to have a big platform, and that's what, as departmental leadership as well, we're always looking into, or just, how do we balance that? So in my program, what we always did was very simple. We just questioned everything everybody else did, and innovation happened. But there was a process to it. There was a methodical way, and we tried. The other big part was we were not afraid to fail because we failed so many times. I think the fear of failure is what keeps us from innovating, nothing else.
Definitely work.
Yeah.
Okay, I have one question. Thank you, Professor, for giving a very good presentation of the aspects of applied and basic research.
Yeah.
I have a point. So in the land grant system earlier, in the earlier days, there used to be a lot of emphasis was given for the fundamental research, followed by the applied research. Now, in India, in most of the foreign universities, we are not into the basic research. We are immediately we go for the applied research. We want where we want immediate results or the technologies to be transferred to the foreigners. So, in your opinion, of course, we need to have a strong fundamental research bag. Then only you will be successful and you can come out with amenable technologies. So this has been nowadays this basic research is lacking with us.
Sure.
So what is your opinion in American universities in TAM and all? You give more concentration on basic research or you go for more of applied research?
I think the answer is we do all of it. It's equal emphasis on fundamental, applied, and translation. So it's if you just do one or the other, then kind of you lose the sort of the rhythm. But it's all of the above. That's what I've been trying to say, that we need to have a diversity of people focusing on fundamental and applied, because without that, and then I think also focus on translation of all of that.
Thank you.
Well, I just want to say that I think in the 50 years that I've been able to see things evolve here in the state, that I can remember early in my career that our administrators were very sensitive about doing things that were inconsistent with funding and that sort of thing. And because the administrators, you know, these commodity groups would call them up and beat them up over that. And so part of this, as the funding has withdrawn, that does create a sense of urgency, as well as I think gives us the right to go out and try to replace that funding. And so it's very interesting to me to see that some of the administrators that we had, the kind of position they took, and then after they got out of that, they were much more accommodating to international work or all kinds of things, because they wanted to make sure that they didn't get in trouble with the legislature. So my point is, and Texas has always been a very parochial state. I think it's interesting that you talk about the left and right coast of the United States, and I can even see, you know, our beef cattle industry used to be much more conservative and withdrawn. They used to think, you know, that the world ended at the borders of Texas, and our plant people tended to be more progressive, but now even the animal people are really, you know, getting in the swing of things. So my point is, I think that the things that you've been espousing in your presentation here are going to be, you know, very engaged and inviting as we move through this next generation of professionals and students. Way different than the world we grew up in.
Thank you.
Anna?
So my dad also would probably agree with a lot of the things you said. He grew up in the 60s and 70s, and the life he lived growing up and what we do now is very different. So he could probably talk a lot about just being able to be grateful for how things have progressed over the last couple of decades. We come from a beef cattle background, and so when I see this 9 out of 10 companies fail, I definitely have seen lots of different people in the cattle industry, especially because it has so much to do with weather and horticulture and different things that are all kind of tied together. So my question to you is, like, a lot of the hort classes I've taken here are based on a picture perfect scenario where there's no drought and you don't have to worry about drought insurance, and there's no variables that would make your yield not effective, right? So how do you prepare students going into that entrepreneurial role? How do you deal with those adverse effects of things you can't control, and how you teach them, you know, yes, things are not always going to go to plan, but how are you going to bounce back from these effects?
I think it's, we will change the curriculum of content to include that, but I would say fundamentally, it's a mindset change. It's okay to fail, to come back, as well as things will not go according to plan. I think that's, and not worry about that, why is my GPA not 4.0?
Yeah.
That's probably the mindset change we need to bring in and focus on that. So I think there is a lot of things going on in our department right now. We are looking at our curriculum, bringing expertise from the industry as well, to really provide real world scenario to complement what our professors are teaching, and sharing the variations to that picture perfect scenario. So thank you for your question.
Thank you so much. And before I have 2 closing comments. One, I know that Dr. Elliott will appreciate one of the things that you said, because you said the Ohio State University. Dr. Elliott, Did he do that right?
That
And
is-
the other
and
thing
he's
you
from
said that
WSU,
didn't,
so.
and the other thing that didn't necessarily get a rise, and I think part of that is that you talk about in the 50s in the middle. The older we get, the more the middle moves. So for some of us in the 60s, or so that's the middle of it. So don't lose sight of that.
All right.
So again, we'd like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Dingra for a wonderful presentation.